All right, so welcome everyone to the fourth Infill Development Task Force meeting on May 26th at 6 p.m. My name is Nick Reinhardt. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, I work for Supervisor Dan Stork in the Mount Vernon District. I work as his land use and development staff aide. Again, this is the fourth meeting of the Infill Development Task Force. I'm going to do a quick roll call of the task force members. If you can just designate that you're attending by saying here and what community or organization you're representing. So I'll start. Alex Tarasio.
I'm here, Wellington Civic Association on Cameron Road.
Thanks, Alex. Alyssa Pease.
I'm here, Toxamont Community Association, Shenandoah Road.
Anne-Marie Ternulo. Anne-Marie. Okay. Britt Patterson. Not here. Kathy Ledeck. Kathy, okay.
Hey,
Eric.
This is Paul. You know, Kathy's is moving away pretty soon.
I do know that. Yeah. I think she'll be still in town when this task force.
Knowing her, she'll be on Zoom even if she's out of the area.
Yeah, right. She did email me about that this morning. But I think we only have one more meeting after this, so I think she won't be moving until a few months after. So, okay, Erica Christ. Gretchen Walzel.
She's on vacation.
Okay, thanks. Heather Johnson.
Here, Wellington Civic Association, Cameron Road.
Thank you. Catherine Ward, I know, may not be able to make it. Laura McDonald, I think, is also out. Leo Milanowski.
Here, Mount Vernon MVCCA Special Committee on Stormwater and a resident of Holland Hall Village.
Louis Gennario, I know he couldn't make it. Patrick Abbott.
Here, just a resident on Westmoreland Road.
Thank you. Paul Krizek.
Here, I'm a resident of Holland Hills, but I am here as in my capacity as delegate for 44th District, which is about half of Mount Vernon.
Thanks, Paul. Paul Wilder. Okay. Ray Novitsky.
Here, Ray Novitsky is from Novitsky Architects.
Thanks, Ray. Senator Scott Surville. Or anyone from his office. Okay, not seeing anybody. Susan Neal. Susan Neal. Okay. All right, thank you all. So before we get started, I'm going to share the agenda on my screen for tonight. All right. Everyone able to see that? Good. So the minutes from the third meeting we held on April 21st are live on the project website, still in draft form. If there are no objections or comments about the meetings, speak now, forever hold your peace. Okay. So before I get to turn over to staff, I wanted to give just a brief update on a couple high-profile projects we have going on in Mount Vernon. The first one being the Messiah Lutheran Church infill project on the corner of Fort Hunt Road and Bellevue Boulevard. Most recently, the developer Evergreen Homes finally believe completed demolition on the final house on that property. There was a brief civil matter that my office was involved with in close coordination with Evergreen and county staff about neighbors on Blueville Lane wanting to negotiate with Evergreen to save a shared tree. So after some determination, it was determined to be a shared tree, and we were able to save that one. I know that, a lot of residents on this call feel that, the clear cutting of trees was pretty tough to see, but, I'd like to think that was a small victory. So that development shall continue, and we'll keep you updated as we move forward. Another one I wanted to mention, and I may request a bit of help from Matt Hansen from LDS. There was recently a subdivision plat. This is a bit different. I just want to keep it in mind that this is a bit different than an infill plan, but there was a subdivision plat submitted for 1509 Collingwood Road that our office got notice of. It is currently occupied by the First Christian Church. It has not been sold yet, to my knowledge, but there are tentative plans now which are being reviewed by county staff to have the church subdivided and redeveloped into 7 single-family homes. Matt, if you'd like to provide more information about that and kind of how the subdivision process works, that would be appreciated.
Certainly, I'd be glad to, Nick. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. You gave the broad strokes, 7 lots where the existing use is. There'll be 7 homes on the proposal that the county has received on a subdivision plan, 7 homes and an outlot where their stormwater management will be. There'll be a new cul-de-sac through the property serving those 7 homes. The subdivision process, I know several people on this call might have received notices. Owners of subdividing property are required to send a notice out to the community. Owners within a certain number of feet receive that US mailed notice. And everybody on this call is of course now aware of the project. We can share those drawings with anybody who'd like to see them. Subdivision is not infill lot grading plan development. They'll come in after approval of a subdivision plan. They'll come in with subdivision grading plans that demonstrate compliance with the overall plan. So the most interesting topics, the stormwater management, the street itself, even the urban forestry content, that's all on the subdivision plan. And so that plan number that you may have received in notices, if you'd like to see that, we can certainly share it. That's in advance of the individual house permits to grade out the lots and build the homes themselves.
And Matt, if you could, I don't know if it'd be easier to share it in the chat, but I guess the email that folks could get in touch with in your office to request those plans or request information.
Yep, absolutely. I'll put that in the chat. So I'll put the plan number and our LDS FOIA team. We've got 3 people working that email address, and they deliver plans in progress. I guess as I'll get to in a minute about the infill lot viewer.
Great, thanks, Matt. Any questions from, and the way we have the agenda, just for point of clarification, we do have questions by members of the public at the end of the meeting, the last 15 minutes. But I wanted to know if there was any questions of the task force members about this particular subdivision plat, or particularly about the Messiah Lutheran Church property development.
Is it a by right development?
The Collingwood Road.
Yes, that's correct. It's a by right subdivision. So their lots would meet the underlying zoning. They would have to meet all of the existing zoning district requirements to create any new lots in that area. But it is not a rezoning or other legislative process before they can subdivide that property, so long as they meet the underlying zoning.
And does that go for taking down the trees there too? Is there anything that could stop that?
They will have to comply with the county's tree preservation ordinance, the same as an infill lot grading plan does. So if there's anything to be done, it is that they need to try to preserve the trees to the extent possible with their use, the same as other by right development.
All Right, any other questions from the task force members?
Yeah, I have one. Did the developers in either of these locations try to preserve the trees? Or did they seek any waivers from the county? And if so, did the county grant those waivers?
This is the Collingwood Road.
Yeah, that's right, Brian. We're still under the first submission review. So so I don't think any decisions have been made on it yet.
Yeah, to clarify, Alex, that Collingwood Road is still in the preliminary stages. There's been no construction happening as of now. So, but we will keep you all and everyone interested informed of those updates. Brian, did you want to add anything?
No, I will say that our foresters do represent the community, and we do our best to preserve tree, even outside of that, those requirements, we're trying to preserve trees that can survive the construction process. So I don't know the details specifically, and so if you want to ask questions on specific projects, I'd be happy to get back to you. But generally, our position is try to save the tree if we can. But it's these by rights are tough.
Leo, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. So the property has not been sold yet, but a plan has been submitted by the current owners.
That's my understanding. Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at least it may have been sold, but just at least our tax map records are not up yet, or not updated.
I haven't looked it up, Nick, but it is not uncommon for folks to not complete the sale until some contingent contract has been satisfied involving approval of plans. So if the ownership hasn't actually changed yet, that's not that unusual.
Okay, and the other question I have is, what's the current zoning? Is it R5, R3? And what's the size of the property? Or is that going to come out in the wash? Should we just wait? And if you guys don't have the details on that, I can wait.
I could perhaps get that in the chat bar, but I don't have that from memory, Leo.
Okay,
I think off the top of my head, if I may, I think the underlying zoning is R3, and I believe the property itself is 3 acres.
okay, okay. So it's 7 individual lots right now, which would be, or is that what the subdivision process would make, would change a single lot into 7 lots? Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah, that's correct. It's 1 lot that needs to be subdivided to allow 7 homes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And finally, it just has to comply with all the zoning regulations now in effect to be able to do that.
That's correct. And every other regulation that applies to land disturbance, the
Sure.
stormwater, tree preservation, erosion, sediment, and so on.
Gotcha.
The
Thank
normal
you.
development regulation.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Right. Any other task force member questions about those 2 things? All right, so next on the agenda, and I think I shared this link with you all, but a few weeks ago, Land Development Services released a infill and conservation plan submission viewer tool using our GIS software, which allows folks to, see and search for any infill plans that have been submitted, approved, disapproved, or under review currently by magisterial districts. So I wanted to allow Matt Hansen from LDS to share an overview of this plan, kind of walk us through how to use it. And I'll be happy to put the link in the chat for folks to access it. And also there's a function there where you can sign up for email alerts. So Matt, floor is yours. I believe you're muted, Matt.
Thank you. Can you see that PowerPoint slide? Did I share that correctly?
Yeah, it's I think you need to put in full screen view?
I did. Do you see it full screen?
I see it with notes
Oh.
somehow. Yeah.
Probably shared the screen over here. Let me just swap that. How about that?
Perfect.
Cool. Well, you just have to see the side of my face as I look over there. I put this in PowerPoint mostly so that I would have something to share with you all by email. I want to put this into a PDF so that you can have the links after this meeting. I intend to demonstrate this tool for you, not kill everyone with PowerPoint here. The announcement is that LDS has these new tools for neighborhood notification. We're very proud that we've got this out for public consumption to make it a bit easier, a bit more transparent what development's occurring in your neighborhood with infill lot grading plans. Conservation plans are caught up in this as well. So see notifications about smaller projects, pools, and other backyard installations are common on conservation plans. So we have the two halves are a web map. You can come in here, browse around, search by address, and see parcels that are highlighted where there's been any application within the last 6 months on those parcels for infill lot grading plans or conservation plans. On the right-hand side, there's a partner to this, and that's a weekly email notification system. If you choose, you can put in your email address here, check which district you're interested in, so Mount Vernon or others, and subscribe. That'll get you a weekly report of new applications that have come in for the districts of your choosing. So I will go ahead and demonstrate this. And is my map taking up the screen? I didn't just share PowerPoint. Can you see that map, Nick?
It's still the PowerPoint, I believe. Oh, wait, hold on. Do you have it like kind of split screen, or is this just a screenshot on the left here with the map?
Oh, yep. Let me unshare and reshare. I think I just shared you the PowerPoint window.
Okay. All right. Yep.
All right. You see the map or the PowerPoint?
Oh, the map.
Excellent. All right. So when you open up this this map, you have the whole county at your disposal. Zoom into an area of interest. So go down here to Wellington. And you'll see several different colors on our map. We have a legend underneath this button up here in the upper right for approved, revised, distributed plans. Some are disapproved and others yet resubmitted. Approved and revised are the most common. If you click on one, let's go with this revision. Revised plans, they are what they sound like. They have a revision superseding and going with the underlying submittal. So here we have 3. This says 1 of 3 when I click on the colored polygon, and it tells you the plan number right there. One thing we couldn't do with this application was to give you the plans directly out of this application. Certainly wanted to, but we weren't able to make that happen in this iteration. So here, what you'd want to do if you'd like to review this data is send us an email and we'll return a copy of the plans to you. You can also cycle through to see what other applications there are. I mentioned this is a revision, so you may be interested in not just this approved plan, but if you cycle through, there's a revision that goes with it. For plans in progress, you'd see a status called distributed. These are plans that are actively under review. So if you see it pop up on the weekly notification, you would also, if the plan hasn't been acted upon by staff yet, you'd see it under distributed status, and that means it's distributed to staff for review. Plans that are disapproved remain here for 6 months. So if a project has stalled, it's between submissions, you'd expect to see that it's disapproved if staff has given comments on the first submission and the owner and applicant are out making corrections to their drawing, that would show up as a disapproved set. In the layer list, you can turn off some things, addresses, parcels. This was set up to be a very simple map, so this is definitely not trying to be all of the things that the county's other web maps are. Just trying to get you that specific piece of information. So if you see land disturbance on your block, you can come in here and check out what the plan number is and easily and quickly request it from us. The second piece is the notification, much less to show here. I'll open this up and show it off. It is nothing to show here. This is exactly what's in that screenshot. But when this PDFs and you get a copy of those slides, you can click on the links to see that. So it's as easy as checking one or multiple districts and subscribing by your email address. In those emails, should you choose to unsubscribe, you can do that. There'll be a direction in the email on how to unsubscribe. This is for your reference with copies of the slides. What to do for these plans? Unfortunately, like I said, we don't have copies in the map. You'll have to email LDS FOIA with that plan number that you read out of the map, and we'll quickly get you a copy of either plans in progress or approved plans. For any questions about the plans, our FOIA staff are great, but they won't be the ones to answer questions about those plans. You can email us, LDS SDID admin, and we will distribute those questions to the appropriate party to get back to you with the right information based on the question. So if it's a question about work in progress, our admin team will efficiently get those, get that information over to site inspections, or they'll get it to the correct reviewer to get an answer to your question. We've also posted it to our site development webpage, so you can find it on the site development section of our Land Development Services webpage to get a link to that web viewer. And with that, I would take any questions about that web map, if anybody has any.
Thanks, Matt. I'll just, before we go into questions, I will just mention to folks that when this presentation is available, it will be posted on the Infill Task Force project website as well for everyone to access. And there's been a request to put the link for the plan viewer in the chat. I can certainly do that. We'll start with any questions that anyone in the task force has for Matt. Ray?
This will give anybody in the public, this is basically for the public to know what's going on in their community if they so choose. It's not a indication of what's coming up. It's an indication of what has been submitted already. Is that correct?
That's correct. This is only applications that we've received. So we wouldn't be logging, say, calls of inquiries about what property is developable. This is just projects that have come in for at least the first submission, and all of those that are approved or denied within the last 6 months.
So if somebody is asking for something like a change in the zoning or an approval for something that's out of the ordinary or not by right, that information would come to the public first through probably the Mount Vernon Council. And then after the Mount Vernon Council has reacted to it and the developer has submitted something, then it would show up on your viewer, correct?
That's correct. If the result is an infill lot grading plan, it will be showing on this viewer just as soon as we receive that application.
Okay.
And for those legislative approvals, rezonings and the like, there are existing methods for getting that information out, like you said. We were trying with this, it's a very narrow product, only the infill lot grading plans and conservation plans. They aren't publicized in the same way as those legislative approvals. So this is an effort to be a bit more easy to access for the public to know what's going on in your neighborhood.
Got it. So it's basically just for infill. There's a lot in Huntington where I work or where I live, and it's a fairly large parcel with a single family or maybe two single families on, and the neighbors are up in arms about, it's all wooded, and neighbors are up in arms about somebody that wants to come in and build 8 to 12 townhouses on it. That would show up on here, correct? Because that would be a subdivision, essentially an infill from a larger lot.
The word infill is a bit tricky there. Infill lot grading plans are specifically these by right single family lots that are being developed. Infill in another context could mean infill of existing parcels. If you ask some developer, the word infill might just mean anything in an existing neighborhood. In this sense, it's just those infill lot grading plans. And we just use the word infill as shorthand. So if something's to be subdivided, it might be, it would not show up on this map, but it would show up to the neighbors as US mailed notifications that are required by law for by our local ordinance of those subdivisions if it's by right. And if it's to be rezoned ahead of time, then it would come through all of those public hearing processes. You see those folks showing up at Mount Vernon Council and other outreach that goes along with legislative actions and rezonings.
Okay.
L. John, is this Leslie Johnson with her hand raised? L. John too.
Yeah, that's me. I just, in response to the last gentleman's question, it sounds familiar. I think we did get some inquiries on that from a zoning perspective and a density perspective. I think that area is zoned R20, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it's, I'm not sure, but if you wanted to give us a call offline, we can look at it for you. But I don't think, and nothing's been submitted yet.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Any other questions from task force members about the plan submission viewer? It's a great tool. I've signed up for email alerts. So, if anything, you guys have me to inform you all of any upcoming developments. So, yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Matt, for that presentation. We'll move to the next item in the agenda, probably what you've all been anticipating. So last meeting, if you recall, we did have a great discussion about a survey that was sent out to the task force members to show what priorities you all would like to see potential improvements in the infill development process. And there are essentially 3 areas you'd like to see improvements in around tree preservation, stormwater management, and zoning. So what county staff has done so kindly is put together a presentation of some initial things they've been looking at to move forward on a county level or potentially move forward on a county level, gain broader consensus on a board level to look at and analyze changing in our existing ordinances. So I will turn it to whomever will start from county staff with that presentation.
Nick, thank you very much. I'm afraid you're gonna have to watch me fumble and see which screen shares here. I'll share the slides for county staff, though we have Brian Kitely for Department of Public Works and Environmental Services to present on some forestry topics, and Leslie Johnson has joined us for some zoning topics. So let me share this. I'll run the slides for the 3 of us as we run through a couple of ideas from staff based in things we've heard here. For your consideration, we'll hit these in brief, and then if there are anything in these lists you'd like to drill in and talk about and flesh out more thoroughly, we're here for that conversation.
Great.
All right, you get the full screen slides there?
Yep.
Good, thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, Brian Cately, I'm the Director of Urban Forest Management here in the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services. First off, I just want to say we hear your concerns. It is a serious issue that we've seen the tree removal, and so we've looked at some of the recommendations and kind of discussions that we've had, not only with this task force, but others that are concerned with the same issue across the county. And we're looking at our tree preservation process to see if there's improvements that we can do kind of within our own, current authority. There are limits to the authority that require tree preservation. The enabling statute provides for multiple avenues to provide owners a request to deviate from the tree tenure or the tree preservation target. And so we've identified some areas that we believe that we can enhance the current process to better validate some of these deviation requests and ensure that the new trees planted remain longer. And these 4 areas that we're focused on are on the slide, so I'm not going to read them to you. And I think we'll be providing these after the meeting. We don't have any specific details on these yet, and we're seeking direction from the Board of Supervisors to further explore these improvements. We want to hear feedback from the task force about these areas for improvement or questions about these recommendations. We'll use the feedback as we refine the recommendations moving forward. Once we get some direction from the board to pursue some or all of these ideas, we'll develop the details. But that's kind of where we are now. So these are things that we think we can do under the current authority without having to go to Richmond, the whole Dillon rule issue, without having to go to Richmond and look for more authority, which I think in some aspects we could benefit from. But right now, within the authority that we have, I think these are the areas that we could focus on for development.
Brian, and this is Delegate Krizak. One thing I would say, and you're right, going to Richmond is pretty. They really don't care about our trees up in Northern Virginia. But having said that, I would like to have the county give its General Assembly members some direction. And so, this is really important, but also at the same time, you should be giving us what the county citizens want beyond what you can do right now. So if it's, limiting some of these deviations, as you mentioned, there may be ways to tweak the statute. There may be ways to do things. There may be ways to do stuff in the budget even that can go around the regular process. But also know that what I've learned in Richmond is that it's baby steps, and we start today, and maybe in 4 or 5 years we can have a much more robust tree saving legislative packet that becomes the new law of the land. So don't give up on Richmond, but obviously that's going to be difficult. But I like where you're going on this. What I think is important is figuring out just what you can do, as much as you can do to save trees under the current legislation. I think that's the way to go right now. So, but you can do both. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Krizak. I'll move on and give just a highlight list of our SDID or site-related items. They're under the banner Stormwater Management, though I present on behalf of the Department of Land Development Services with a focus on those site-related items. And to dive right in, site inspections, we've heard questions at this group about how will we ensure the plans are followed. And so it's worth investigating what if anything, should be done differently in our department with site inspections, especially at the closeout phase at the end of a project. That leads right into the as-built surveys idea. We are, periodically asked, how do you verify that what happens on the site matches the plan? And we believe we should investigate our authority to see if we have it and do it if we have it, to require topographic surveys of these lots, especially in the most critical cases where overland relief, that area where stormwater flows away to not flood something, might be of critical importance to existing and proposed homes. We'd have that the developer, like they do with building height, actually come in and survey, does the site drain like it's supposed to, by surveying the topography. Idea that would require quite a bit of analysis is cumulative land disturbance. All of those small additions add up. Our ordinance looks at land disturbance projects in a singular sense, one that occurs as one project, not if the house that was built last year now wants to come in with a large outdoor living space and the cumulative stormwater impact of that. Those are two separate things under the ordinance as it exists. And so that may be worth further consideration. Single family homes, this is a cleanup item for me in the stormwater management ordinance. Some are exempt from the stormwater management ordinance and thoroughly regulated under the Public Facilities Manual and the state erosion and sediment control laws. Though it is a little messy, that about 2/3 of single family home construction infill lots are subject to the stormwater management ordinance. And we have a different set of code comments and references we give for others, and that creates confusion in the regulatory process. So we would propose removing that. During review, we're already focusing as much as we can on those small increases, sheet flows, as they're sometimes called, and the overland relief component especially. And so are there further requirements, easements on overland relief areas to make sure they cannot be obstructed in the future in a way that would impact adjacent homes, for example. There may be more to investigate there on a staff side. And we heard loud and clear at this task force, the coordination with VDOT is critical. When a plan says it drains in a certain direction, but VDOT maintenance is an issue, that actually happening in reality. What are we doing and how to coordinate with VDOT is an area where we can probably improve, and staff would put that out there as an action item after this committee. I'm going to pass it to Leslie. Nick, if we'd come back for facilitated questions, we'll do the staff presentation, and then if you lead us through questions at the end of this.
Sounds good.
Okay. Hi, Leslie Johnson, zoning administrator. So some of the things that we were looking at, and these would really, I think, on the elimination of the bay window extensions into setbacks. I mean, we heard you all talk about that early on in the project. And right now the zoning ordinance allows bay windows, which are defined basically no more than 10 feet in width and no more than 50% windows can encroach 3 feet into the required setbacks. And, you know, some of them are a 2-story kind of bay window, but they still meet those requirements, and can add, and it adds bulk. So one of the things that we could look into is just eliminating that permitted extension. That would be countywide. We'd have to amend the zoning ordinance, but that's, I think we'd get some pushback from folks, but I think that's something that can be looked at very easily. And then for substandard lots, and one of the things we would have to do is define what that means. But for purposes of today's discussion, what we're probably looking at is similar to what we find in Wellington, which are the 50-foot wide, 125 feet lengths. For an R3 zoning district, the minimum lot width is 80 feet. So, but that would have to be defined at some point. But one of the things that we looked at, and we think that depending on the situation, And the devil's in the details, but looking at perhaps a lower building height. What that is, is it right now, building heights are the maximum building height in residential districts is 35 feet for, your single family zones. We measure at the midpoint based on of the roof, the tallest roof, based on average grade. So if we were to look at something like 30 feet, we'd have to figure out how we might want to measure that, because, with the smaller lots, you don't have as much room to work with. So you tend to have a steeper roof line. So maybe it's that you can do a 30-foot with no raised basement, it's just 2 stories flat, slab on grade type of thing. And then something else we talked about were because, again, as I had mentioned earlier, these are legal lots of record. And so I think we might have some difficulty saying to people, you can't, and some of them have been combined over time with one building permit, and now they're breaking those apart. And there is concern about whether we can take away those rights, but perhaps as an option that we could allow for someone has 2 of these substandard lots, and rather than having each lot meet the current setbacks, which in an R3 is 12 feet sides, that you could allow a 0 lot line between the 2 units, and then consider and giving them an option to increase the side setbacks, which we think would provide more compatibility with adjacent properties. Now, I have some examples that I can share. Matt, can I go ahead and try to share the screen with these photos? Because I would be done. So here's, and I don't know if you can see this. Share.
In Zoom, if you had to hit it twice, yeah. Okay,
Is it
I
showing?
can see that picture of the
So
house.
this is in essence, it's a duplex, because you could have a 0 lot line, but via a wall, via a garage. So that's something that possibly could consider. I have another photo of another one. Can you all see that one?
No,
We'll see the first one.
No, just the first one.
All right, let me try again. Maybe I have to hit share. Okay, hold on. Maybe it has to be a new share. Okay, here we go. I'm not used to Zoom. Can you all see it now?
Looks
yes,
good. Picture 2.
So, I think we could make that as an option. I don't know that we could mandate it. There are pros and cons. I could say, I mean, we couldn't, I think it'd be difficult for us to mandate, style. But, with a lower height, as you can see here, this is probably close to 30 feet if you were to look at the midpoint of the roof. So that was, but that gets to, what we've heard about, compatibility with existing, because it does take on the appearance of a single unit and would be more in keeping perhaps with the character. So those are, some of the thoughts that we had. But again, we the devil's in the details, and we'd need to define what we would consider a substandard lot, and then how we might apply this. And this would be, of course, have to be countywide. So,
Thank
but
you,
those are the main things that we're looking at.
Nick, and this committee, that's the end of our prepared remarks. With those dozen or so bullet, concise suggestions, those are things staff's heard that we would submit to you, Nick, and to the committee for if you would ask us to investigate something coming out of this. That's what we've heard so far. So we're prepared to have a conversation about any and all of those that you'd like to talk about.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Leslie, for the presentation. Again, folks, this presentation will be posted on the project website for your consumption. And feel free to get in touch with either myself or you could get in touch with myself or any of the county staff with questions about it, and we can get those answers to you. So right now I'll open it up to any questions from task force members about anything from that presentation. Ray, go ahead.
I wanted to know if you looked at bulk and height in relation to how big the lot is. I know that some of the jurisdictions, and then even Fairfax County, if we're not talking about a single family house, will limit the height based on how far it is away from, say, the side yard. So in other words, if you're close to the side yard, you can't go up very high, but if you're further away from the side yard, you can go higher because there's an angle of bulk plane. Have you looked at that for this?
Well, actually, when we did the ZMod, we did look at that, and the way we changed it from quote angle of bulk plane to just a table because it was so difficult for folks to figure out. It does not right now. It does not apply to residential. It only applies to non-residential. So I think we'd have to look at that to see. We had looked at that back in the mid 2000s, and we were doing we were looking at setback ratios and to try to, address the whole looming issue. And, we're trying to make it so something that's easily understandable by the layperson and by the builder, because not every home is done by an Evergreen Homes or a Pulte. I mean, there are people who do their own building. So, I mean, that's something we can look at as far as, and I think if we were going to lower the height, we'd have to kind of look at how we would measure that and if we would have to change that. So we haven't gone into a whole lot of detail in how to do that, but we have we think that we have the enabling authority and the legal authority to do that. And that's pretty much, kind of as far as we've gotten. So it's just an idea.
The reason why it hasn't been done, the main reason is because it might cause confusion among people that are not.
Well, it's never been addressed. Now we have increased building height. We allow in certain districts, we looked at increasing building height in your larger lot zones like RC district, and we did do an amendment that would allow them to go from 35 to 40 feet if they can meet a larger setback, all the way around, like 50 feet. They have to meet 50 feet, from front, side, and rear. And I don't know that there have been many that have taken advantage of that, to be quite honest with you. But again, I think 35 feet has been in the ordinance for a very long time. We did change, as I had mentioned earlier, back in one of the things that we did do as a result of some of the infill discussion back in the 2009 timeframe, is that we did redefine grade for residential development, and we have a pre and post grade, and you have to take the lower of the two. So you have the original grade, and then if you're going to dig down and create a walkout basement, the height is not based on the new grade, it's based on whatever is the lowest, at the time, so that it's trying to keep that height from building 3 stories out of the ground type of thing. So we did, came out of a lot of this same kind of infill discussion.
Right, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So in the previous meeting we had, I think it was Senator Servo who suggested that this task force could recommend incentivizing homeowners who have historically, what's the term that they use, substandard lots, incentivizing homeowners to consolidate those lots into a single lot, possibly the county could waive or reduce the fees required to do that. But instead of taking away the rights of homeowners to use their properties in the way that they are currently zoned, incentivizing people to change their zoning. I'm curious why, if the county believed it had the authority to do that within existing rules, and if so, then why there were no recommendations along those lines.
Well, it's not, and I'll defer to Matt because that comes under there's a subdivision. It's not a subdivision, but it's a lot consolidation, and the plat has to be filed. And I don't know whether the board would be willing to consider, a lower fee and what's involved in that. So but it's not a change in the zoning. We're not changing the underlying zoning. We're just saying, instead of having your 3 legal lots of record, I'm going to file a plat of consolidation, which then in essence creates 1 lot. And I don't know, Matt, we don't, if that has to have then a subsequent record plat being filed, but Matt can answer that, I think.
Sure. Fees are set by an appendix to the code. The board, upon being petitioned, may waive fees and do in certain very limited cases, or the structure of the fees can be changed. Certainly at direction of the board. Code amendments, the fees are code, can be changed. It didn't make this list of staff's recommendations isn't meant to be all-inclusive, and is not meant to rule out any one idea from this group's consideration. So it's not on this list, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. If the board so desired to incentivize that activity by eliminating a certain class of fees, we could find a way to get that written in. If it would be effective at incentivizing that behavior is a whole another question, but maybe an important one to discuss before getting into an activity like that. The fees that we're talking about for consolidation and plats, they're measured in the small thousands of dollars, not really the same scale as development of the house, much more high dollar activity.
Any other questions, Alex, or was that it?
On that topic, those are the only questions I had. I am curious as well, but if others have questions about these specific recommendations, I'll yield to them. But I'm curious to hear about other ideas that are outside of the authority of the county that maybe y'all came up with and you would like to share with us.
Any comments from staff there?
Not from land development services side, no.
We were sticking within the existing authority. I think the board every year will put together a legislative package and explore what they would like to see changes, like outside of current county code. So that would be I think the more appropriate path for that.
This is Delegate Cruz. I got to follow up on that because I see that board packet comes very late in the day in December when we've already finished up most of our legislation, and I've complained to the supervisors about that. But I hope that this is a part of that process of coming up with those board recommendations, that it starts in community groups like this with county staff, and then that gets to the board, and Nick's here for Supervisor Stork, certainly taking notes, and that's how it kind of bubbles up to that process where the board makes recommendations to us down in the General Assembly. But I hope that that's the process, because I would love to see the board come to me and tell me things that they'd like, on the infill, on how to prevent trees being taken down and things like that.
Yeah, if I could add on to that, to what Delegate Krizik mentioned, I think that something that could come out of this outside of the kind of recommendations that county staff has come up with within the enabling authority they have now, I think a longer term solution or medium to longer term solution could be what you mentioned, Alex, is kind of get a list of what those solutions that would require an extension of our enabling authority and send that out to the General Assembly, either through a legislative through the legislative package or another process. But I can definitely talk with Supervisor Stork, and at the conclusion of this task force, I just want to caveat it may involve longer discussions with other board members, but we can certainly pursue that as an option. All right, Leo, you had your hand up.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Nick. As far as Alex's issue about the looking at some sort of financial incentives, I thought also that Catherine brought up about the use of the conservation trust process to mitigate some of the loss that would occur between the going rate that you could sell that lot for and what you really sold it for when you put it in the trust. So, but I don't know if that's a county responsibility. I really didn't get to talk to the conservation trust guys at the environmental expo, so I don't really know the full deal on that. But I think that was another point, and I think Catherine brought that up in my notes. That's what I have. But anyway, let me go back. Brian, can I start with you? So you listed 4 things there. Longer lived trees is great. Added shade tree planting. What is there some sort of rationale behind that? I mean, most of the trees I see planted on infill lots now are shade trees. They're maples, because I assume they suck up more water than others, but don't know that as a scientific fact. So I'm interested in what the rationale is behind that. And I'm also asking what benefits you would get out of getting a tree preservation plan submitted earlier. Would that just give you more time to negotiate or analyze, or what is the rationale behind that? And then I have some questions for Matt and Ms. Johnson too. So
I'll try to be concise. The first question regarding the I think the shade tree planting requirements. So right now, to meet your tree 10-year tree canopy, you're required to do it. It's a combination of preservation and planting. There's a preservation target that we would prefer people do, be able to meet that. But then they can, if they need a deviation or they're granted a deviation, or even if they meet their conservation portion, say there weren't any trees on the lot, and there are lots like that in the county, they would meet their 10-year tree canopy completely through planting. Right now, we have a table within the public facilities manual that give estimates of projected 10-year tree canopy for different species of trees. So for example, a category 4, I think at a certain diameter is projected to give 400 square feet. So bear with me. Right now, we do not have any kind of, how would I put it, direction on what percentage of those trees should be canopy trees, what percentage should be more ornamental or understory trees. And so the thought there is, and I think, many of us see this when we go to other jurisdictions, is that in residential neighborhoods, there's often a shade tree in front of the house. And we think that that's a nice look. Right now, we have no way to enforce that. So if they so choose to have a shade tree, then so be it. And I think you're right. Most people do plant with shade trees. One, because they're looking for that look that we see when there's a nice shade tree in front of the house. And then 2, it's the easiest way to meet your 10-year tree canopy is to plant trees that will get larger first. So that's the thought there. And then the second question was regarding submitting the tree preservation plan earlier. So right now, when urban forestry is distributed plans for review, we're considered an outside agency. So we're we're kind of following the process that LDS has laid out, and then we're asked to review to meet the Chapter 122 as an outside agency. And as the process works currently, typically when we get these plans, engineering is near final, meaning this is for the most part, and believe me, there's some folks that don't take this approach, but I would say the majority submit the best plans that they can, looking for approval on the first round. Now, I'm not in private sector, so I don't know the exact numbers, but I'll throw out some just ballpark. I'm going to guess that civil engineering costs for a single family infill development are probably somewhere between, and Matthew, tell me if I'm totally out of the ballpark, $10,000 and $30,000, depending on the site. And so when you've spent $10,000 to $30,000 and you come to us and we say, well, is there something you can do? Can you move the driveway? Can you move the utilities? Can you change the grading? Can you put the stormwater feature somewhere else to save trees? There's already a sunk cost by the applicant. And what the theory is there is that instead of having them come to us with a sunk cost for engineering that they can't back out of, if they were able to come to us earlier in the process and say, do a preliminary plan, which would show, we would require some certain things, but not final engineering. So things like, maybe we require property boundary, we require the existing vegetation map, tree inventory, and then a very rudimentary proposal of what was to be built. And those kind of rudimentary proposals would be, like a box on the plan saying, this is the house, this is the driveway, this is the garage. There would be a little more play there when they don't have a significant economic sunk cost that they can't back out of. So what we're trying to do is get the natural resource preservation, conservation prior to the applicant spending that money on engineering. That's the theory. I've observed through experience, some other jurisdictions have processes like this that may work for us. But to tell you the truth, I haven't seen it applied on smaller quarter-acre lots. I've seen it applied on larger lots, and I do feel that results in better natural resource protection through the development process.
So it's sort of a draft plan before they go through the other processes that are involved in the county.
Yeah,
Okay.
not only the processes, but paying the CAD drafters, the engineers to do the calculations. That level of engineering starts to get very expensive.
Sure.
So the issue that, we need to work out the details, but the theory is before they sink that cost of paying the labor to get all those calculations and drawings prepared and permit applications filled in, they come to us at the beginning of the process and we talk about trees mainly, but other natural resources, things like invasive species, right? So that's one of the biggest issues we have, especially in some of these older neighborhoods, is where the invasive species have taken over the woods. We have a hard time giving full credit for canopy, knowing that if we were to count those trees as 10-year tree canopy, the invasive species would then take over the tree, and in 10 years we just have a tree full of English ivy or whatever, name your invasive, kudzu, bamboo, and that's not really the point. So
Yeah.
So those two natural resources I think could be better planned for if the process would allow for it.
Nick, I could speak to this a little bit if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead, Paul.
So my name's Paul Wilder. I'm a principal at RC Fields and Associates. We do the civil engineering design for a lot of our clients. We do a lot of these infill development plans, and I think that's a wonderful idea. And it would be nice if that could be done informally, because I think just like Brian's talking about, we get into a design, we start out. The way the process typically works is that we'll do a field survey. We locate all the trees on the site. Then at that point, we turn that survey over to a certified arborist who does a condition analysis of all the trees on the site. Then we go back and start to implement the house design, grading, stormwater management. And that's when you take into account the trees and their root zones and things like that as we start to formulate the final plan. And it's not until we have a fully developed engineering document that has clearing limits does an arborist want to see that drawing, because that line of clearing limits then shows the effects of where the disturbance will occur and how that relates to trees. So it does get to, I mean, it really does start out with survey. We do that. He does a condition analysis of trees, whether they're dead or diseased or dying or invasives. And then as we formulate all the engineering, at the very end, we're always waiting for the arborist report, because it is the very last thing that is done, because they want to see that final product. So if there was an ability to do that in the middle or up front, to say this generically is going to be kind of like this, and these trees aren't so good, or the homeowner, the client would like to remove that tree and have feedback, I think that would help to preserve, protect, and even move these things along. And I think it'd be good input from the county side as well as the client and the homeowner. But that's generally how it goes. Another quick little note, grading plans typically run in the $15,000 to $20,000 range for a generic. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, a typical grading plan on a lot in these areas is about that price.
Any other?
Can I just ask one more question about the tree? So maybe this isn't apropos, maybe it's not applicable to our situation, but so again, property owners have the right to do what they want with their property. So after they take possession of the house, any house, infill, new subdivision, they can do to their trees and their understories, canopies, bushes, they can do what they want with that, right? There's no amount of time that the new trees are protected from any kind of owner activity. So if somebody bought a house, they could come in, they, you know, put 5 or 6 maples, 100 azaleas. They could just take those out right after they buy the house, right? So there's no long-term guarantee that those trees, that 10-year canopy is ever going to come to fruition.
Yeah, that's generally correct. And that's also the case outside of the land development process.
Sure,
So,
sure. Yeah, I can do it on my property. Yeah.
and it happened to me. My neighbor bought the house and decided they didn't want any tree, if you could believe it. And I had to sit through that.
Okay.
And I could see their deck where I couldn't before.
Okay. Yeah.
The exceptions to that are areas in the resource protection area, and then areas that are put into some sort of formal conservation easement. Am I missing anything, Matthew? Trying to think of any other conditions where we have some authority.
I think you have it, Brian. The question is about by right infill, and we don't typically have restrictions on tree removal in those cases, except for if it were in the resource protection area, and that's governed by its own chapter of the county code.
Yeah, yeah.
And proffered and rezoned development sometimes comes with conservation easements, or are there similar restrictive conditions, but that's not what we're dealing with in infill development.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Thank you. Matt, I know that you've been dealing with us on stormwater committee, so you've given us a great tutorials on the whole stormwater and how it flows and stuff like that. But I'm afraid people on this committee might not understand overland relief and sheet flow and things like that. Is there a reference that they can go to figure it out? Because I think you and the way I understand it, that overland relief can go over a next door neighbor's property, and sheet flow can go over a next door neighbor's property. It's concentrated flow that's the issue.
Leo, you give me a question I don't have a good answer for. Is there a good resource for homeowners to better understand some of these very jargony terms about drainage review in infill lot development? Off the top of my head, I'm afraid I don't know one.
Okay.
for the discussion in this group, we do care greatly about somebody's grading during development not impacting the drainage from or to another home. And that's especially difficult where there are, we use the somewhat jargony term through drainage, drainage accumulating over more than one, often many lots. 5, 10, and 15 acres may flow across a particular infill site. And the path of overland relief is where is that water going to flow? And so we try to pay careful attention to it. And it's on my list of suggestions for should there be a further or more restrictive or even just more detailed requirement published for plan preparers like Paul, so he knows exactly what we need to see and how we need to see it to demonstrate that a plan will not negatively impact that through drainage, that path of overland relief where stormwater needs to flow so it doesn't flood somebody else's house.
Yeah. And again, just to clarify, maybe people don't understand that there is allowances given for this overland relief where stormwater can flow across a neighbor's property. And the only condition for changing that would be if it is a change to the existing overland relief, not if it's causing a new problem, then it's a problem. But if it's not causing a problem and it was already there, then it's not a problem. That's to trying to put it in technical jargon, and I really don't understand.
To paraphrase, if I may, we like to talk about honoring existing drainage divides. That you can't shift large portions of your lot to drain it. Drain a different direction than they did before, and that really goes hand in hand with sticking to the existing drainage patterns for that through drainage or those points of overland relief, the lowest point where water is going to back up and cross down to the next place it's going. Changing those requires careful review, and in infill lot grading plans where there's existing uses on all sides, the default is to not change the direction water flows, to not change the points where water flows from one yard to another.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Then I just have two questions for Ms. Johnson, if I can. You mentioned that you're going to look, maybe we'll look at the incursion of bay windows onto the lot setback requirements. But how is there a requirement? Do driveways and basement ways? My understanding is they don't count in the total impervious surface calculations or the lot setback. So your driveway is not a part of a setback issue and neither is a basement way.
Well, the area way is, if it's below grade, it's not a setback, but if it's for some reason above grade, then there is things like generators, HVACs, and those kinds of things do have a setback, can't be closer than 5 feet to the property line. But driveways, no, we don't regulate the location of driveways other than we do have provisions that say you can't cover more than, depending on the zoning district you're in, X% of your front yard with, pavement. I mean, we do have that provision, and that's looked at as part of the infill. And we don't see that too much with new infills, but, sometimes we see more of that if people are, wanting to put in a circular driveway or something like that and go beyond that. That's, as part of an addition or something like that. But there are provisions that limit the amount of pavement in the front yard. And then we also have provisions that limit the amount of accessory uses, structures in the rear yard and then there's provisions to allow expansion of that with a special permit.
Okay. I asked this question before. I was on that infill committee that Supervisor Highland put together back in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. And there were a lot of suggestions that came out of that, but I guess the University of Virginia kind of just threw up their hands and said, we can't get the consensus on this. And
Yes.
so nothing really came out of it.
Well, the
Um,
grade did. I mean, the change in the definition of grade came out of that, and we did make that change.
Yeah, we like to think that that was the Shellhorn Road project that caused that change, but we're not going to take credit for that. Anyway, you mentioned that the R3 minimum lot width is now 50 feet.
No.
80.
80.
80
Yeah,
feet.
if you look under the R3 district, the minimum lot width for is 80 feet. And then a corner lot, it's 105 feet.
Okay, well, how do lots get built on 65-foot lots then, say in
Because
Holland?
they're legally recorded lots, and they may have been recorded prior to the zoning ordinance
Oh, okay,
in effect, and we allow, you don't have to meet the lot area or lot width. You can build on it, but you have to meet the setbacks, you have to meet the building height, you have to meet, and there are other things that you have to meet. As long as you can meet all those other provisions, you don't have to meet the minimum lot area or lot width requirements.
okay. Is that in the zoning ordinance?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And it's been, and we have, because as you know, we've had 1940, as I said in my previous
Yeah.
presentation, we've had
Yeah.
zoning ordinances, over time, and we've remapped the county. Last time it was remapped was 78. And so there were lots that were created prior to that, those new regulations. And we do allow people to, continue to use those lots. So if we were going to do some of the things that I mentioned, I mean, what we're focusing on are those substandard lots that, are less than the 80 feet. But what is that? Is that 50 feet? Is it 65? Is it, if it's 79, I wouldn't consider that a substandard lot, so that would have to be defined and determined.
Okay.
And that would, we'd have to do a lot of, research and looking at that. Because
So
there's
that's
going to be a lot, there would have to be a line drawn, and then somebody's is going to be on the other side of that line.
Sure.
But
Okay, and I just have this is my final question, and I'll get off my podium here. And I've always had this question, and Matt was nice enough to send me the regulation for the roof, height calculations. And you guys have always spoken about the midpoint is used for I think it's for gable ends and
Right.
for hip roofs at some other measurement. But it's not really an absolute requirement, again, of 35 feet. It is a floating calculation based on the midpoint between the top of the roof and the gable end, or the eave, or whatever it's called.
and it's also based on the average grade.
Well,
so we
sure, yeah, right. We don't want the new grade to be the midpoint for the roof. We want the original grade, which is what you.
Well, with the lower of whatever the lower of the two is.
Yeah, okay.
But yes, that midpoint. But we do, if right now we do require height certifications. If you project, they have to submit a height schematic.
Right.
And if it's 33 feet or more, they're then required to do an as-built height certification. We've had a few that busted the height, and they either have to fix the trusses or they have to get it. Some of them, we've had one that got a variance, that applied for a variance, and I think they may have, it was on a larger lot, so the impacts were less. So I mean, if we look at height, I think that's going to be a difficult one, because there's so many. But it we can, for those substandard lots, perhaps a lower building height.
Yeah, could you tell me, I don't know this, I'm not poking around asking questions to get people, why measure from the midpoint, not from the absolute height, if the hip roofs and gable and gambrels are measured from their absolute height?
You know, it's interesting because we do that for accessory structures. We measure from the lowest point of grade to the height. But accessory structures are supposed to be subordinate to the principal structure anyway. You know, I think at one point we had an issue with how height was being measured because they were measuring it and averaging from each point of the grade, they were measuring to the midpoint of that roof. So as you know, garage roofs are shorter. Sometimes they have different sections of the house. So it was allowing for a much, you know, a higher roof line that was probably pushing 40 feet, you know, and that was happening. And we kind of found that. And so there was a letter to industry back in 2005 and 2006 that corrected that and said, this is how you have to measure it. I mean, we could look at that, but I just think, you know, I mean, with the style of roofs, you have to have, you know, for architecture purposes, you have to have a certain pitch to make the house look right. And so I think that's partly why we measure to the midpoint.
For gable ends, but not for gambrels or hips or other kinds.
Right, or a flat roof. I mean, if it's a flat
Flat
roof,
roof.
we measure to the, you know,
The
base
flat
of the
roof.
roof.
Can I interrupt here? I mean, I have to run, but I'm on Westmoreland, and I'm gonna just walk you outside really quick and show you what I'm looking at. So I don't know if you can see it. Yep. So that's a 35-foot house from the midpoint, and like you said, from the grade. But we're downhill from that house.
Mm-hmm.
So it's effectively 45 feet for us, right? This is what I'm looking at. There used to be a tree there. It used to be complete privacy. And now every night when I come out, I'm going to be saying, hey folks, how are you doing? It's good to see you. I'm in my underwear or whatever. I'm joking here, of course, but you know, there's a complete loss of privacy, complete. And for them too, I mean, we're going to be very intimate people. And so I think this 35-foot thing has to be addressed because it is 45 feet when you're downhill. We don't live in a field, which is not Indiana, right? So we have to think about the topography, the landscape, and all these kinds of things. And I understand the complexity of it. And I understand you can't, you know, it gets into being, you know, how are you going to adjudicate all that stuff? But there's a reality here, which I'm looking at a skyscraper, right? So just, I mean, I think this is an important conversation because they're completely inappropriate for the neighborhood and for the topography of Fort Hunt and things like that. So again, I may be off my rocker here, but it's just something to think about.
Okay. I appreciate that comment.
All right, thanks, Leo. Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it all. If there's no other comments from task force members, I'm gonna save the last bit of time we have for any members of the public to ask questions before we wrap up and kind of outline next steps from here. If no one has an immediate thing, I can start in the chat. There was a question from Caitlin. This is from Matt. Is the developer of Collingwood subdivision required to give notice to neighbors? My property backs up to this plan and I have not received notice. How can this be rectified?
Yes, they are required by the subdivision ordinance to send US mailed notifications that a subdivision plan has been submitted. So you will, at some point before permit issuance, receive those notifications if you live within 500 feet. And so it may not be out there with submission 1. Sometimes those go out at a later point. The requirement under the ordinance is that we may not issue that permit until at least 30 days after those notices are sent.
And just to add to that, the email above that question, ldsfoia@fairfaxcounty.gov is where you can request a copy of those plans. So, question from Elaine, how do I get on the email list for these matters? I just happened upon this via Facebook. So if you're referring to the Infill Development Task Force, there's a project website, which I'm happy to post a link in the chat for your access. That's where all upcoming meetings will be. There's not an official email listserv per se. However, if you have any questions about any of this, or and again, the project website will have materials from past meetings that are posted. So Another question, are existing trees required to be noted on a development plan?
Or I'll take this one unless Matthew or Leslie want to take it. I guess I take all the tree questions. Yeah, so a tree inventory and condition analysis is required of all development plan approvals. So on the front end, there's something called an existing vegetation map that must be submitted, and that's kind of where we get existing tree canopy from. We look at things like quality of trees or presence of invasive species. And then once the applicant kind of determines where that limit of clearing and grading is for the particular site, all trees greater than 12 inches in diameter, I believe, are required to be inventoried and, given a condition analysis, within 25 feet of that limit, and then inside 10 feet. And the reason you may say, like, well, why are you inventorying trees that are inside the limits of clearing and grading? It's so that we can recognize trees that may have potential for preservation. And, given the current process that we use, we would then, if we saw a tree that had potential, we would have a conversation with that applicant to see if there's something we could do to preserve the tree. So that's why we do the inventory inside. So hopefully that answers that question. Any follow-up on
that? Seems like that was adequate. Thank you, Brian. Any other members of the public attending, feel free to put a question in the chat or use the raise hand function in Zoom to ask a question, and you can unmute once you're called on.
Hi, Nick. This is John. I don't seem to have the raise hand function, so I'd verbally raise my hand if that's all right.
Oh, no problem. Yes, sir.
Hello, everyone. My name's John Noto. I am a resident impacted by the 1509 Collingwood development plan. And I did happen to notice or view your previous meeting, which was sort of an in-depth discussion of the Messiah Lutheran development plan. And I was wondering, I viewed today's meeting in the hopes that maybe 1509 would be discussed, but that wasn't a primary issue, probably because it is in preliminary stages. But is one anticipated, a meeting of the task force anticipated with the developer of that plan in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Noto. So I want to clarify that the meeting you're referring to that was recorded was not a meeting of this task force. It was a meeting of adjacent property owners to the Messiah Lutheran site with the Evergreen Homes development team that was requested to discuss with them kind of an overview of that development and allow for those residents to answer any questions or concerns, have their questions or concerns answered rather. So in short, yes, we can, regarding this particular project on Collingwood Road, I can work with staff to facilitate a meeting of that sort and set that up. So
yes, may I request just such a meeting? That would be great.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I believe you and the folks in your household sent a list of questions over, which I will be emailed to me, which I will forward to staff and get answers for you regarding this development as well. But yeah, I'll work with Matt and his group in LDS to work on that.
Thank you very much. If I may be allowed a second question, again with regards to the 1509 Collingwood property plan, just for the task force's attention. The surrounding properties, including my own property of that 1509 plot, all of our properties slope down toward that wooded lot, and so stormwater and groundwater, of course, is a concern for us, a major concern, given the plan for the development and the vast increase of impervious surface that the plan entails. And to the extent that I can understand that plan, it incorporates double sump pumps into those planned homes. That it seems to also plan for an underground water detention facility, et cetera. So water is certainly of a concern to the developers. But my question is that the property does have a designated wetland on it of the Little Hunting Creek, and there is that wetland flows into a culvert, which is visible nearby, and so it does exhibit quite a bit of flow. I mean, it's not the Potomac, but it does have a constant flow, and so my question would be to the task force as does the plan as provided by the developer incorporate in their calculations all of this additional surface area, namely all of our homes that are down, graded down towards that lot? Does it incorporate those into its calculations as to deal with that additional water?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Noto. And I'll answer first by saying you'll certainly see us from Land Development Services in a more detailed community meeting that Nick will organize to talk about this with the whole set of neighbors who are interested in coming. To answer briefly, yes, any conveyance that's designed, the pipes, channels, designed stormwater systems that need to convey something in the same way it did before development must consider everything that flows to that point. So your backyards flow down towards this piece of property. The developer, their engineers will absolutely consider getting that water safely through their site. And county staff's job is to check those calculations and make sure all of the appropriate upstream drainage areas have been considered in the design of the plan. So there'll be no blocking of flow that today comes across your backyard and into this property. They can't be allowed to stop that existing flow pattern. They'll have to account for it.
Thank you very much. Does the Army Corps of Engineers ever plug into this equation and examine the wetland itself and what it's out or what its future may hold?
They absolutely could. It is it's required to get a Corps permit if you are disrupting wetlands, contiguous connected wetlands that are part of jurisdictional waters, as is the important term at the Corps of Engineers. Not all wetlands, but jurisdictional wetlands under their purview may require permits to remove. This area is not county regulated resource protection area, so there's not the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance on this lot. There are no areas subject to that, which would require extra preservation and extra water quality protection for that channel where water does flow across this property. There are sometimes situations where wetlands exist that should be regulated, that are regulated, that are not county resource protection area. And so if that's the case here, the landowner would be responsible to go into the Corps of Engineers and getting appropriate permission before they disrupt any wetlands. It's not common, but if that's the case, that would be how the landowner is obligated to respond.
I see. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you very much, Mr. Hanson.
Thanks, Matt, for those answers, and thank you, Mr. Noto, for the question. Another question from Maria Lewan in the chat. Question about sidewalks on Collingwood Road. None exist now. People living on that street have no ability to walk up Riverside Road. For example, students who may want to walk to Stratford Elementary for school. I'll defer to Matt for any questions about sidewalks maybe being involved in the subdividing of this parcel, but I think generally that's a separate issue, if I'm not mistaken.
I'll speak to it to the extent that it is an issue with this subdivision. Subdividers are required to put in improvements coming from the comprehensive plan. So where there's a need for sidewalks, sometimes trails appear in the comprehensive plan. Here, the first submission's been turned in, puts in sidewalks because they're required with subdivisions, and they must also put in any public improvements required by the comprehensive plan. And that's limited to their frontage. So with this long, narrow parcel that is, let's say, 300 feet along Collingwood Road itself, the larger lack of good pedestrian infrastructure around Collingwood Road isn't going to be addressed by this project. They'll put in sidewalk across their frontage, their short piece of Collingwood Road, and that is drawn in the proposal. They'll have sidewalk there. They'll have internal sidewalks as well. They're putting in a cul-de-sac to serve those 7 lots. There'll be sidewalk on that cul-de-sac. But this applicant is not required to go further and put in pedestrian infrastructure on Collingwood Road. So it's not really a satisfying answer to the whole lack of infrastructure on Collingwood Road, but they are doing the part proportional to the amount of land they own on Collingwood Road. So expect to see some small piece of sidewalk there.
Thanks, Matt. And obviously we can discuss this in the upcoming meeting we'll schedule regarding this subdivision, but a broader priority of Supervisor Storks, I will add, is to get more sidewalks on Collingwood Road. So we have over the past couple of years been working with VDOT. It's a slow process to get that implemented, but you know, as far as putting sidewalks on the rest of that road, you know, that's an ongoing discussion between our office and VDOT. So hopefully, you know, talks will progress soon, but we're definitely working on it. So I'll entertain one more question from the public before I wrap up. And as always, feel free to send questions to me to get answered. I can pop my email in the chat or to our office's email, and we can work on getting your questions answered. Okay, well, with that, I'll conclude the meeting. Thank you all for the discussion, and thank you to staff for your presentation of the initial recommendations. I believe our next meeting is scheduled to be held on June 27th, which is also a Thursday, probably at the same time around 6 p.m. But the link will come out in a few weeks before that. I believe, from what I hear now, that meeting will be, I think, majority will be dedicated to more discussion of these recommendations that were presented. Any follow-up questions can be answered from the task force. Please, in the meantime, you know, take a look at the recommendations. It's June 27th, a Monday. I'm sorry, it's a Monday. Thank you, Ray. It's kind of the weird outlier meeting. Anyways, yeah, so please take time to review these materials, which will be posted to the task force website. And we'll be in discussion, or our office will be in discussion with staff in between now and the next meeting to debrief and, you know, plan the agenda, but expect the majority of the time to be dedicated to more Q&A and then outlining some potential next steps with these recommendations. So, all right, well, again, thank you all. Appreciate the time as always, and have a great rest of your evening.